killed in September last year because she was walking in her small town in Asyut, Upper Egypt, with her friend and a donkey, and all of a sudden a man groped her. So she spat at his face, so he shot her down. And according to the prosecution, they recognized this case as a manslaughter case, and it took us a very long time to actually fight for the fact that this was an assault and manslaughter case. Violence against women, sadly in Egypt, all forms of violence against women, sadly, and across history, continues to be a socially accepted practice, and sadly a norm. In the realms of policy and social awareness, we sadly, before 2008, we failed to tackle this issue completely. Civil society organizations and we don't really have an organized feminist movement in Egypt, but activists, human rights activists and women's rights activists have been trying so much to tackle this issue on the ground. Many times, civil society organization drafted a violence against women bill and tried to, admit it or try to lobby for a new law that tackles this issue. For your info, in the Egyptian Penal Code, sexual harassment, for example, is not even present in the Egyptian Penal Code. We have 3 articles that we try to use, in order to submit or file sexual violence case, sexual crime case. Rape in the Egyptian Penal Code is only recognized as vaginal penetration. So, as I mentioned before, a survivor of rape told me that, so if a train just drove into my vagina, the Egyptian Penal Code does not recognize this as rape. It's assault. And oral rape is not recognized, marital rape is not recognized, anal rape is not recognized, male rape is not recognized. So it's very tough in terms of the legal aspect of it. I try to focus on sexual violence used as a political tool to marginalize women, especially in the context of the uprising. And since I tried to mention how it first started, it was very evident. In May 2005, on the 25th of May 2005, known as Black Wednesday, after the constitutional declaration by Mubarak that paved the way for him to just stay for another 1,000 years, him and his son, female journalists and activists were protesting in front of the press syndicate in Cairo when thugs attacked them and sexually assaulted them, raped them. The difference is like police officers and members of the NDP were there watching them and like giving them instructions of what to do. And this was one evident example of how the regime has been always using this form of sexual violence in order to marginalize women and kind of scare them off from the public sphere. Just so you know, sexual harassment, for instance, is everywhere. It's an epidemic in Egypt, and it happens from, or all forms of violence against women. This happens from the day you're born as a woman. You're circumcised. You're then forced into, whether early marriage or getting out of school in order to just sit at home till you get married. And it goes on and on with sexual violence from the moment you get out of your house or inside your house. You can be harassed and raped inside of your house. Taking public transportation, going to work, going to school, sexual violence at workplace. So it's everywhere, and you can't really get away with it, sadly. On the 25th of January, Egyptians took the streets to demand the downfall of the regime and bread freedom and social justice. And I'd like to point this out for many people who argue that the demands of the Egyptian revolution did not really include any of the feminist demands. That's completely wrong, because social justice is in the very essence of feminism. And on March 9th, we witnessed one horrifying, horrendous crime against the female protesters in Tahrir, which is the quote-unquote virginity tests conducted by the Supreme Council of Armed Forces in the Egyptian Museum, which sounds extremely surreal and super disgusting. Surprisingly, the man who supervised the virginity tests is now like the pseudo-president of Egypt, Sisi. And and all forms of violence against women have been carried out by organized groups in some cases, by the state, that's for sure, whether in the form of police, army, supporters, but it reached a very shocking level where I'm not sure if really, I can't really tell if sexual violence in protests has increased, or thanks to the group that are working on the ground, we actually know of the cases that are happening. In every protest, it has become sadly a norm that you would, hear a word that you do not necessarily like, you get groped. It has become normal to the extent that, if a man is walking by, he can easily, it's, as I said, it has become sadly a norm that you do this, and no one is there to stop anyone, and definitely we're completely against the police, so it also, you get into the same, limbo of, or confusion about, okay, so if I get harassed, or if I get groped, if I get raped in Tahrir, what should I do now? Because I hate the police, and I'm against the police. But then again, I don't know what to do with the perpetrator. So it's a pretty bad situation. Assaults have been constant, and until it was I remember that the first time I read of a very terrible case, let alone like how the media, we're talking about this, how the media has been covering sexual assaults in Tahrir. At first it was like Lara Logan, her name?
No.
Yeah. It's like, it's all the white man's perspective of just, focusing on this one female white journalist who was in Tahrir and got assaulted and so forth. But I remember it was June 30th, 2012, when an English journalist wrote a blog entitled, Please God Make It Stop. And she was talking about her rape that lasted for maybe like 13 minutes, and how it was completely like a hell of an experience for her. And that was really like a wake-up call for many people, like, and sadly, like, at this point, not many women would actually speak about their assault or rape experiences. Like, I remember in 2008, Nohal Ustaz, which was one strong woman who just decided that we were raised, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that, but we were raised, the word harassment was non-existent in the Arabic dictionary, like in our daily language. It was more like mu'aksa in Arabic, which means an act of flirtation, which, like, completely sugarcoats the crime. So women were never, besides the victim-blaming culture that we have in almost any crime that happens in Egypt, not necessarily only sexual crimes, women are never really, like, sure what to do in that case, so they just remain silent. And Nohal Ustaz in 2008, she kind of broke the silence by filing a sexual assault case. And surprisingly, and the first time in the history of Egypt, the perpetrator was convicted and he was sentenced to 2 or 3 years in prison. I can't really recall. Noha was completely attacked by everyone, by the media. She's a traitor, she's a spy, she's But in a way, she encouraged many women to actually speak up. And, for Samira Ibrahim, who's one of the survivors of the virginity tests or whatever, she came out and she spoke about her experience, which is a revolution on its own. If anything is kind of successful in the Egyptian revolution, I would see the aspect of women speaking up and not remaining silent on such crimes. That would definitely be something that I'm kind of positive about. In November 2012, the president at the time, Morsi, he also came out with a constitutional declaration, and people went to the streets and protested. And we've heard of many incidents, whether they happened to us, to our comrades, or to people that we just, know of. Many women were assaulted and attacked. And I remember everyone in this room, any Egyptian in this room has kind of participated in this movement. We decided that we'd form a group called Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment at first. It was called Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment because, as far as we understand, we didn't really see how horrendous such crimes were on the square. And on November 27th, we decided that we'd wear pink ribbons, reddish pinkish ribbons, and we'll walk around Tahrir in the midst of all the protests individually, and whenever we see a case of, in our head it's a case, yani, it was just, I'm sorry if I can get a bit emotional about this, but it's just for us, we didn't really realize how horrendous this crime looks like. We're talking about 1 to 2 to 3 women surrounded by a number of 200 plus men, using sharp objects, boiling water, sand, anything they could use in order to just let the crowd who's trying to help to just fuck off, you know. And I'm so sorry. It's okay. اليوم هتكلم ازاي مش هخم في فرق بعد don't worry. No, I mean, like, I'm sorry if I got emotional about this, but because I remember that in November 2011, on the 18th of November 2011, you know, I couldn't speak up when I was assaulted, for example, in Tahrir. And at this point, it seemed, even though, like, for me, I thought that that's a big thing, after seeing what's actually happening in 2012, I felt like I was just thickened. I wasn't even assaulted. The level of violence used was just insane. I'm so sorry. So we decided as a group of activists, human rights defenders, as I said again, every Egyptian in this room is part of the movement, to form Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment. And we took the streets, or Tahrir specifically, and the perimeters of Tahrir on November 30th, where we recruited volunteers, and we decided that we will intervene in cases of mob assault. At this point, we didn't really, we're not experts, we didn't really have an idea of how it's like and so forth. And we took the streets by having, basically, we're formed of 3 major groups. The Square group, or in Midan group, that distributes flyers of what to do in cases of sexual assaults or mob sexual assaults, and raises awareness of what we do, spread our hotlines. We receive as well as calls. Another group, which is the intervention group, that actually intervenes in cases of mob sexual assault or rape, and their only focus would be on the woman to just get her out. We're not a rescue group. We try to make the experience less horrifying for the survivor. And the third group is the safety team, which basically takes care of the survivor post the assault, whether to provide her, we provide safe houses for the survivors, so they'd have a place to sit or not. There are cars that can take them wherever they want to go. In cases of needed medical assistance, we provide the legal, the medical, including psychological assistance for the survivors. And I'm talking about, at this point, we were a small group of maybe, did not exceed 100 members, that kind of risked their mental and physical health, risked their brains, risked their vaginas in some cases, in order to try to make the experience less horrifying for the survivor. In November, on November 30th, our first time in Tahrir, it seemed bad. Every time feels like it was the worst. Every experience, every operation feels like it's the worst case scenario. It can never get worse. November 30th, it was really bad. But then, January 25th, 2013, in the midst of the celebrations, or whatever you could call it, like the protests on the 2nd anniversary of the revolution. Also, that that day felt like it was the worst case scenario for our group. But the group intervened in 19 cases, one of which a woman was raped with a knife. And that's when we realized that, you know, this will keep on going, and it's just getting, I feel so bad that it's getting so violent, because one day my mother taught me that when you walk down the street and someone cat calls you or whatever, just ignore them. And I blame this generation for the level of violence that we've reached. So that day marks, I mean, that's the day when we really, like, I guess, I don't know, everyone in this room who participated maybe in the operations that we carried out, it was such a depressing day that our bodies are being used as a political battlefield. And it was such a horrifying experience for me, because I know many people that since that day they wouldn't participate in protests. Luckily enough, we managed, or another group called the Uprising of Women in the Arab World, they organized a protest of, even though maybe I disagree with the name of the protest, but it's called a global protest against sexual terrorism. And we protested against, you know, the crimes that take place in Tahrir, and luckily the protests were successful. They took place in about 35 cities worldwide. A day before that, that was February 12th. February 11th, 2013, a member of the Shura Council, which basically, like, it's a legislative authority, a member of the Shura Council said that women go to Tahrir to get raped, or those who get raped because they want to get, I can't remember his ridiculous statement, and he's a guy with a beard and all, religious man.
Women who agree to be around thugs and people in Tahrir.
Yeah, and how can they ask the police to help them when the police can't help themselves, even though we didn't ask for help from the police. Then again, I just to highlight this fact, because probably that's the question you all are asking, like, who are the perpetrators? Who are those mobs who carry out such assaults? We call the assaults, or the action itself, the circle of hell, because that's when you have the certain number of women surrounded by, it starts off, what I'm saying now is not factual at all, it's just an assumption from the similar patterns that took place in cases. It starts off with about maybe 5 to 15 men that start the assault, which can look from far away as a fight and not necessarily an assault, and all of a sudden the circle, like, grows and grows and grows till it reaches, like, you know, it just looks like as if, I don't know, like football team fans are just surrounding and, like, doing something, but except that it's like it can reach several hundreds of men. You have a group that intentionally seems like they're experts in starting this off, and there are other bystanders who just, you know, use this opportunity to, you know, I see a breast, I might as well just touch it, you know. And sadly, this increases the number. There are people who are watching and doing nothing, and then there is Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment and Assault, that changed its name later on, the evolution of, you know, the crime, that is there trying to help. And the brave volunteers tend to face all sorts of obstacles to get to the woman, whether they can get stabbed, they can get brain concussion, boiling water, as I said, and all sorts of obstacles that they might face before managing to get the woman or the girl out. Many minors as well in such assaults, I have to mention, and families. Moving to June, the latest phase of assaults, and I really hope that it's the last phase, but I doubt. In the midst of the protests demanding the ouster of Mohammed Morsi, and from June 28th until July 7th, the group has documented 186 cases in Tahrir. 3 rape cases, one of which a woman was again raped with a knife. This number is huge, and those are the cases that we know of. In one day, July 3rd, we documented 80 plus cases. We lost count. We write 80 plus cases because we lost count. We don't know. And at that point, I mean, in January we thought that the assaults take place in certain areas in Tahrir. And at that point it was just everywhere. Literally everywhere. I'm sorry if this is getting depressing, but the resistance is there. Women are there. Women who still go to protests are there to make a statement. No matter what you do, I'm still going to protest. And I'd like to mention one inspirational character that I'm so privileged to know is Yasmin al-Baramawi, a woman who was raped for about more than an hour. She was basically dragged, put on top of a car, and people like the organized gang or whatever, they said that she has a bomb strapped on her abdomen so no one would come and help her. She was on top of a car, and they're driving around with her. And Yasmin just wouldn't take off her hands, her hands off her crotch. She was the entire time just, trying to protect herself. And she came out on TV on February 1st and spoke about her experience, which is fantastic. And she said the name of the street where the assault started was Mohammed Mahmoud Street. I don't know if you're familiar with the Egyptian uprising events, but Mohammed Mahmoud Street is where many protests took place. But she said, whenever I see Mohammed Mahmoud Street on TV, I hold on to my pants. And this is something that, I mean, many women feel, and men, by the way. The reason why I mentioned Yasmin is because she's a symbol of resistance for me. Yasmin till now goes to protests. Yasmin till now, speaks highly of the revolution. Then again, one good thing about this is that we're being self-critical, and we're starting to criticize the revolution as well, and trying to insist that bread freedom and social justice and the demand for the downfall of the regime has to include our feminist demands as well, and the right to protest, and the right to, to just. I can't believe that, walking down the street in a European country, for example, without hearing a cat call is a privilege. We reached a very sad level. Then again, I don't sound very optimistic, but I swear I am. I'm very optimistic by the number of women who started to speak up, the number of movements that, since 2011 until today, I lost count of the number of movements who are on the ground fighting all forms of violence against women. People are starting to speak about, domestic violence. People are starting to talk about, no, seriously, this time, even though FGM is banned in the Egyptian Penal Code, we seriously need to stop it. We're starting to pay attention to what's happening. And this is excellent. This is great news, Before that, it would... In a protest, for example, the International Women's Day protest in March in 2011, it was attacked by men who basically told us, save this for later. It's not the right time to address women's issues. It's not the right time. And now, both men and women were like, okay, no, seriously, we should talk about this. And women started to feel like, okay, wait a second. I don't think that I'm not behind the assault. I did not... You have niqabis who get raped in Tahrir, for example. Niqabis or people with burqa are basically getting raped. So it's this idea of, it's no longer about the victim blaming, but it's about, impunity that has been taking place for years and years and years. And the fact that the lack of accountability has led to the escalation of the violence of the crime. Am I missing anything positive?